What did you want to talk about this one? Whether we were kicking around some ideas.
Yeah, well,
Year in
looking
review.
at the stories that we should be looking at.
Local stories or more broad?
Local stories.
Where do you have your eye right now?
2025. Where have we come in this year, and what stories do we need to follow as we go forward? So, yeah, I have a few ideas. How about you? I mean, does anything come to mind? Like, what was like a big story this year that you think needs to be watched going forward?
For local politics?
For local anything.
I was really focused on, which has kind of already played out now, was the Measure F stuff, the housing elements that they were trying to produce down in Old Town.
Yeah.
Just because, I had the city manager on, I had a couple of people involved with the initiative back when they were trying to get it through. So that was kind of the biggest story, I think, for me.
Were you happy with the outcome?
I didn't really have a stake in it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of taking a back seat. Yeah, I was just interested to see how it was going to play out. And I'm still interested to see how.
And it was interesting how the money didn't make a difference.
I mean, there was a lot of money involved.
So much more money than you can even imagine. It's like, how did this guy get so much money and spend so much money and then have the measure go down in flames? It's like...
Bad investment. You're going to throw that much money at something, you would hope there would be a better return.
Which I guess in some ways, whatever you think of the measure, was kind of nice to see that money doesn't always win. But the story to watch really is what's going to happen with affordable housing in Eureka and what's going to happen with parking in Eureka, because the story's moving forward, so obviously we're not going to see what Mr. Arkley was hoping, but we're going to see something. Now, as I understand it, maybe it's the UROC or the WIOT, maybe the WIOT are involved in one of these projects that the city's working on. I mean, have you been following that?
Yeah, I'm not sure which tribe. I'm drawing a blank right now, but I know one of them is involved. I think that's for the Link Center, potentially.
Yeah, so I mean, Sunset Heights is one of the things I saw, in the news. There's a Sunset Heights development that Eureka's looking at for, I think, the tribes involved, and it's affordable housing. And affordable housing, huge story to watch. Because, I mean, let me ask you, 27 years old, you going to be able to buy anything?
Definitely.
You going to be able to rent anything?
It's not looking great for my generation.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't have... my generation shouldn't have given birth to a homeless generation. What happened here? And, affordable housing is really the issue. Affordable housing is at the root of so many of our problems, including homelessness, which is, of course, what happens when you absolutely can't get into something. You're sleeping outside. So that's going to be, I think, a big story to watch. How is Eureka going to move ahead on something affordable? And is any of that affordable housing going to help with homelessness or people who are in crisis? So I'll be looking at that. And I'm wondering, kind of a second story really, is what's going to happen with homelessness. Again, it's related to affordable housing, but here we have homelessness, unsolved year after year after year after year. And the numbers, if you look at the numbers, and I reported in the Humboldt ZAG back in, April, about the point in time survey. So you're probably familiar, every couple of years, they go out and try to count how many people are homeless. And so they pick a day, basically a 24-hour period, and they have volunteers go out and they contact the shelters and they contact the programs and they contact here and there. And then they actually go out to where people are camping. They try to come up with a number, like how many people are homeless. And if people will talk, what are the demographics of that? And so that whole thing came out in April or May, I believe. Nobody reported on the numbers. I did.
What is the number?
The numbers were, and you can find this on the Humboldt ZAG, is a story called Where the Homeless People Live, or Where the Street People Live. A couple of things that were that came out is that in terms of the sheer numbers, the numbers are going down, but also the numbers are increasing in Arcata and shifting away from Eureka. So Eureka's always been sort of the main place, and this was the first year they counted more homeless people in Arcata than they had before. But the whole thing, you're talking when they go out and count, and of course this is a minimum figure because
how accurate is this
you're
number
obviously
really?
you're gonna miss somebody. So you get a minimum figure of maybe 1,600 people that are homeless. And that number has been fairly flat and consistent over the decades. And then you hear about, Arcata's going to get $3.7 million from the state to help with homelessness. And Arcata has they counted 553 homeless people in Arcata back in January. So that's, $3.7 million is about $6,700 a person. To house somebody for $6,700 a year, pretty difficult. So again, how do you solve homelessness? Well, you have to solve homelessness by having affordable housing. And how do you solve that? And that's pretty hard because American real estate is very capitalistic. It's based upon selling to the highest bidder. I mean,
Supply and demand.
We're totally upfront about that in real estate. It's the highest bidder. I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to try to get as much money from my house as I can. I'm going to rent out my house. I need to get as much money as I can from my house. Who's the highest bidder? And so everything in real estate is out for the highest bidder. Can you imagine going to the grocery store and when you walk in, they say, well, let's see your grocery list. What's your bid? What's your bid? You get it. You go in and get your groceries.
Oh, that would
you
be
don't,
terrible.
But I mean, that's kind of where we're headed.
That's exactly what it is for the housing market. I mean, like you said, imagine if you walked in and you were trying to get a banana and 6 other people already bought them. And so now market price is way up.
Yeah.
Well, you're paying that price.
And it really is like everybody's involved in it because which among us are going to sell or rent for less than the market would hold? So,
well, and that's also what drives the demand is, you get these high interest rates. People don't want to sell because then they'd have to get a new place and they're locked in at a way higher interest rate. If you got locked in at 2%, especially during COVID, why are you going to leave? There's no incentive.
So I think it's a real quagmire. And when young people tell me they can't even afford to rent anything, something's got to change. And it really, I think, it involves everybody. So in my journalistic coverage of homelessness and affordable housing over the years, there's only 2 entities that aren't operating on the profit motive and aren't operating on the highest bidder paradigm, and that's public housing authorities, and nonprofits. So if we're really going to get to the root of things and have some more affordable housing for both homeless people and young people and young families or whatever, we need to see more housing inventory outside the profit the profit motive, outside the market. And that will require the housing authority, public housing, to buy up more inventory, and for nonprofits, whether it's churches, Betty Chin, whoever it is, nonprofits being able to buy up properties and sell or accommodate or rent or whatever it is to people without a huge profit being inserted in the math.
My question with these nonprofits is always, what does their overhead look like in all of that? Because obviously they have staff they have to pay. They've got to keep the lights on at their place of work. Are they taking a significant portion of the funding that would go directly to the individual in need by going through them than, say, working through the city?
I think it really depends.
I'm sure it's a case-by-case basis. You'd have to look at each nonprofit individually.
They're generally speaking, the problem is you create a charity industry where people are making their living, and a pretty good living, at people being in crisis and being on the street. So a lot of times you'll see, and I think in bigger cities than here, you'll see huge institutions that are making lots of money helping all those poor people.
That's what you see with the homeless situation in LA. You see people
Right.
making multiple $100,000 salaries.
Now, I don't think that's really happening here. This is a smaller place. And that's why, like, I'm kind of looking at Yee Haw as one of these stories to follow. So here's Yee Haw, which is not an institution. Yee Haw is this little commune on this guy Garth's land up in Trinidad, and people are living there, and they're trying to make the best living situation that they can, given their own set of circumstances and their income levels and their social challenges. And somebody wants Yee Haw to close down.
I think I've been hearing about this. Is the Board of Supervisors, are they in conflict with them to some extent?
What it is that the health department has gone before the supervisors and said, there's like some sanitation issues up here. There's some problems up here. Now, as far as I could tell from my reporting, there wasn't like a slew of infant deaths up there, and so the health department came in to find out why. There wasn't some kind of botulism or some kind of plague going around that killed a bunch of people, and so the health department had to go in and find out why. Somebody doesn't like them being there, and somebody says, well, it can't be sanitary. We're gonna have a botulism breakout any minute now, so we got to shut them down. Now, I'm guessing, and I'd like to find out this year, so it's a story to follow, Yee Haw. Who wants that land? Who wants to buy that land? Or who's worried about the property value of an adjacent property? Somebody wants that place closed down, and they're using legal means, code enforcement, whatever, to put pressure on this place to go away. At the same time, when we actually need places like Yee Haw to succeed.
Have you been out there?
I have not.
Is this just a tent city, for lack of a better phrasing?
I've seen the county did a really good video. You can find it, where they went out and they did an inspection, and it's kind of it's kind of like a campground in a way. There's some RVs here, trailers there, cars there, some kind of lean-to structures of some kind. Very it's not a planned development.
Just makeshift
It's the
housing.
opposite, the unplanned development, but the ungated community. But it's and I don't know anybody there, which I'd like to change that. I'd like to meet some of the people there. I haven't seen the people really their stories being told. What you hear is the county health department. What you hear are people talking about an unsightly place, some neighbors, whoever they are. And it's actually a self-managed kind of commune place that some people have lived for quite some time. And they haven't had outbreaks of health problems and whatever. Their sanitation needs to be improved. And quite frankly, sanitation is really overdone in this country. I mean, everybody is like freaking out about poop, and yet they'll walk their dogs and let their dogs poop all over whatever. And they'll throw diapers at the side of the road or whatever. But everybody's freaking out because poop has to be put in water and shipped out to the ocean. And it doesn't actually. And it does break down. It becomes compost. It becomes organic material that's important for the soil. So, I won't get into it now, but we need to be burying our poop, not flushing it down a waterway. So you could go in, and if I were the county, I'd want to send somebody in that knew what they were doing about composting that stuff and try to work out a actual permittable composting system for Yee Haw so that, and you can do this. I mean, there have been composting toilet systems permitted in Humboldt County. It's quite onerous because everyone's so uptight about poop that you just got to make sure there's like nothing in that stuff. it could destroy the water table. You'd be amazed at what people say. I mean, this stuff is organic material that breaks down. It's in the soil. It's gone. It's not
I was going to
toxic.
say, I wonder how much of that is fear around what's in the poop nowadays with various hormones and all of the
what
things
we're
that
all
we have.
ingesting.
But that's
yeah.
the thing, and it's already in the soil. It's already in our, like, they find traces of birth control in the water. So all of that, that's almost a moot point to some extent because the fear of it getting there, it's already there. So maybe people
Well,
who trap in
and
the
there's
wood.
ways to deal with it. That's what I'm saying. If you go in with one solution, the one solution is we got to put in plumbing, then you're losing opportunities to do something creative and innovative that still addresses the problem. And so that's a story to watch. Yee Haw.
Who's the owner of that land?
The guy's name is Garth. I don't know if Garth is his first name or last name.
Did this just naturally emerge on his property, this kind of campground?
It'd be an interesting story.
It would be.
I think it's, you might want to have him on to talk about it. I don't know what his goals are, but obviously he's not interested in selling, because if he were, he'd be kicking all those people off and cleaning it up and selling it. Whether Green Diamond or anybody else that's in that neighborhood wants to add to their real estate inventory, I don't know. But somebody wants them out, and I would love to see how the supervisors are going to address that. And I'm hoping that maybe they will do something creative and innovative and help those people stay there instead of throwing them out in the street. Because the solution to homelessness is not to throw people out in the street or to bus them somewhere to somebody else's street. I mean, that doesn't solve the problem. Maybe you feel better because you don't have to see someone panhandling or sleeping on the ground or some crazy guy walking down the street yelling at somebody we can't see. Maybe you feel better, but that doesn't solve the problem. So that would be nice to see that solved. And along those lines, one of the other stories I'm looking at in 2025 is the budget crises. Everywhere you turn, there's a budget crisis. So the state is having a budget crisis, and the county is looking at maybe a $15 million deficit, Humboldt County. And then there's, Eureka's got a deficit. Arcata's got a $3 million deficit they're looking at. So it's like, what is it with deficits? What is it with budget crises all of a sudden? And I'm sure there's some explanations, but I'd like to know more about what they are, because when you go in and you try to find out why there's a budget crisis, you don't really hear a whole lot of discussion. You don't really hear about why revenues are down or why expenses are up. It's just sort of a given that we have a crisis and we're going to have to start cutting things. And then, of course, on the November ballot, we had some sales tax measures that were put on there. And all of those sales tax measures, as far as I can tell, passed. So, Arcata's got a $3 million deficit. They put on Measure H, which increases the sales tax in Arcata a 0.75%, so three-quarters of a percent. Not a whole lot, but they like that number because Trinidad had a Measure L to extend a 0.75% sales tax. Fortuna, their measure failed.
Shout out to Fortuna.
Fortuna's Measure P didn't add the 0.75% sales tax in Fortuna. But other than Fortuna, everybody passed these little measures that raises sales tax. Is sales tax a good way to fund your government? No, I would say it's very questionable. Especially from a sort of recent history where what happened during COVID? Some dominoes started to fall, right? So what happened during COVID? A lot of people lost their jobs because they were working in a situation that made them vulnerable to getting COVID. So people were laid off. People were transitioned to telecommuting. Headcount was cut. It happened all over the place, right? And as a result, consumption went down, and supply chain became, erratic and plagued with different difficulties. And so, we had this economic downturn because of COVID where people were consuming less. Now, in my little opinion, there's nothing wrong with consuming less. We don't need all this stuff, okay? We don't need to be consuming more. But if our governments are being funded by sales tax, then cuts in consumption are going to cut the revenues. Maybe that's what caused these city-level budget crises, that people just weren't paying in sales tax anymore. However, on the county level, a lot of the county's revenue is from property tax. I pay property tax. I pay more every year for my property, and it goes to the county. The largest segment of county funding is from property tax. Did property go down in value over the last 5 years? I don't think so. We were just talking about it.
If it did, we missed it.
So I'm kind of wondering, and I'm going to be covering this and following this. Why aren't revenues up from property tax? And why are we sitting around trying to figure out how to tax consumption more and therefore try to give people an incentive to spend more because that will fund our governments and stuff? It doesn't make any sense. Something doesn't add up here. And usually when things don't add up, it's because you don't have all the numbers. So I'm going to be looking at that story. How are we going to get out of these budget crises, and how were they caused in the first place? And how are we looking at county revenues from property tax, which should be going through the ceiling, right?
Well, how about just mismanagement of funds? We always increase the tax. Have we ever decreased the tax and said, okay, we're making a lot of money, we're spending it wisely. How about we bring the taxes down? Let's do a point decrease. That never happens. It's always, we spent too much. Now we need to start taxing people a little more.
No, I think
what are we spending this money on? Roads aren't getting any better. Homelessness isn't getting any better. What are we doing? Where's all the money go?
Where does it go? And I think a lot of people ask that question, so maybe we'll try to find out. And one of the things, you ever heard of Jevons paradox?
No.
So this guy named Jevon, he was British, back in, I think, the 1800s. He was commissioned by the British government to figure out when Britain was going to run out of coal. Kind of like what has happened in our century with when are we going to run out of petroleum? So Jevon did this study of British coal, and what he basically came up with is it's been called Jevons paradox, is that the cheaper coal was, the more people would use, and the more expensive coal was, the less they would use. Seems like a no-brainer, but there's a lot of corollaries to that. It's kind of like the more you make, the more you're going to spend. So it doesn't really matter how much what raise you get or what bonus you get, you're always strapped. That's Jevons paradox in a way, that somehow humans find a way to use up everything they possibly can and have nothing to spare.
And then some.
Yeah. So yes, of course. And when we talk about our economy, nobody wants to talk about debt.
Nobody's talking about how my generation especially is racking up credit card debt at an astounding rate.
Credit card debt is at a historic high. A historic high, credit card debt. And that's, part of your generation's problem was, let's give young people credit cards. I mean, when I got my first credit card when I was 40.
Really?
Yeah. It was like, that was partly my decision because I felt it was important to live on a cash basis. And, I had an ATM card and I had a bank account and I had a checking account. What do I need a credit card for? And when I was 40, I went into my own business. I became a newspaper publisher. And okay, I can see here I've got some cash flow issues I got to deal with. So I got a credit card. But when I got a credit card, my pledge was to pay it off every month. It wasn't more than a 30-day bridge. It was just a 30-day bridge. And I got into trouble when I was unable to do that. And so I learned the hard way that if you're going to be sustainable at all, don't use a credit card in the first place. And if you do, pay it off every month. And if you can't do that, you got to start evaluating your expenses, or you got to maybe get another job. But the credit route is very enticing, and we're marketed on it on a daily basis. And the cities, see, now this is the thing about the cities and the county that I think is in their favor. They don't have a lot of credit. The federal government can print all the money it wants. A county can't. A state can't. So I think that debt has a different face for governments, but part of that debt is passing bond measures. And there were some of those on the ballot as well, to basically the voters giving government a permission to borrow. And that needs to be looked at. I think we'll be following that, as we go forward into 2025.
I've talked to a few people about the county specifically and their funds. And maybe it's just the people that I'm talking to are a little more inclined to believe that there's something nefarious going on, but that seems to be the general consensus, is that there's some form, I don't know if you would call it corruption, or I've heard the phrasing, people trying to fill their own coffers. That seems to be the general consensus from people that I've talked to. But again, selective bias is at play there.
If there's evidence, let's see it. It's very common for local governments to be involved in corruption, in the sense of people know the elected official, and elected officials are going to maybe favor doing business with people that they know, and that's been going on forever. So it is something to watch, and supposedly we've evolved, bidding systems and whatever, so that, it's all transparent and nobody's getting deals. But, deals are going on all the time. So, what's the deal with Arkley? What's the deal with the Jacobs campus? The civil grand jury said, this Jacobs campus thing really stinks. What's going on there? And I don't think I've seen a really good explanation. I know the North Coast Journal, Thad, has done a pretty dogged approach towards trying to figure out what Arkley was up to. But there's an example where, are elected officials really representing the common good here, or are they making way for somebody that they can do business with? Kind of a related topic that I've been watching this past year and going into 2025, I'm going to be watching real closely, is the offshore wind power.
I was waiting for that to come up.
Yeah. So, talk about business and government working together. That's a pretty striking story, where the federal government is clearly behind electrification. They are selling electrification largely on the idea that it's going to help with climate change, and kind of downplaying the idea that we're creating business opportunities for people in the electrical industry and taking them away from other people. And that's always something to watch, the whole competition between various business interests. So I think in some ways what kind of keeps our democracy democratic in some way is that there's competing interests. So we have a wealthy ruling class, but they fight amongst themselves. The clash of the titans. Is it going to be oil and gas? Is it going to be coal? Good example. Oil and gas is a totally different industry than coal. And that's all different than electrical. So you've got people with a lot of money want to make a lot of money off of different things, that the government can change the business opportunities and can change the market share. So offshore wind, I think there's a lot of reasons to question the wisdom of offshore wind. And this is just from sort of a practical point of view. Offshore wind requires a huge construction project out in the ocean somewhere, and transmission of this power across the ocean to the land. That's a huge issue, as opposed to, say, a wind farm on the land, where transmission of that power would be way easier to achieve, and the construction of those wind turbines would be easier to achieve. Going out in the ocean raises a lot of issues, and there's a lot of people around the world wondering whether that's the way to go or not. This is not just some small conspiratorial person. Enter Jared Huffman, my favorite guy. One of these days I'll probably meet Jared Huffman. I'll have to go fly fishing on the Klamath to do so, but one day I'll probably meet him. But he came out of the gates early in this year in what looked to me like, let's twist these Indians' arms. I don't know. Maybe that's not what he meant to convey. But he came up here and he gave a press conference and he said, you know, the federal government needs to appoint a liaison that's going to work with these tribes, because these tribes just kind of don't get it yet. And we need to pay attention to them. Yes, we need to pay attention to the indigenous people. We need to respect them and get them in a room where we can twist their arm behind their back with somebody who's maybe native also, or whatever.
To make it a little more palatable.
Yeah. But it was clear that, to me, reading what he had to say, the federal government wants this. Shall we say the Biden administration? Shall we say the Democrats? I don't know exactly who we should say. But somebody really wants offshore wind. It's moving ahead. There's been opposition at every turn. And now there's this consortium of tribes. They're trying to put together this sort of like collaborative working group kind of thing. And some of the tribes have come out totally opposed to the offshore wind project. Some of them have been a little bit more open to it. It seems like, from what I can read, Blue Lake might be a little bit more open than some of the others. But I don't know the landscape here, and I really want to know. I want to know what the tribes are thinking. I don't think it's really our place to go twist arms and show those people, them Indians what's what. I think we need to maybe listen to them and see what their story is. One of the things I've been picking up is that it seems like the Anglo-American kind of attitude is, if the Indians don't like it, it's because of they're not getting enough money out of it. You know, it's like a real projection, it seems to me. Like, you're just assuming that all the Indians care about is money. Now, of course, Indians care about money because they live in a society just like the rest of us now that it's pretty important to have it. However, from my experience with Indians, and I've worked for a tribe for a few months. I was a newspaper reporter in San Diego County for the Campo Indians. They had bought a newspaper. So the Campo Indians bought a East County little weekly newspaper, and I was a reporter for them. And so I got to meet the tribal chair. I got to meet the tribal chairs of the neighboring reservations. I got a little bit of insight into how they see things. And it's very different than what your average white American middle-class person thinks. It's different. And moving up here, one of the first things I learned about was the disastrous encounter between American whites and the native people. Just disastrous. San Diego, where I'm from, a little, there were problems. The Indians burned down the mission, but there was a little bit more going on. A little bit more, how can these two civilizations sort of
coalesce?
Work together? How can we live together? There's more of that. Here it was like, we're here, you guys are gone, and just a tragedy. So I don't blame tribal people in this area for not wanting to have anything to do with us and not believe in anything we say. I don't blame them one bit. How do we get past that? How do we actually, and maybe this is what Jared Huffman wants to see. Maybe he wants to see a true equitable collaboration between modern white society, American society, and the tribes. Maybe he wants to see equity and equal footing and everything. I'm not sure he does, because I think he has an outcome in mind, and that's what he wants to see. But I would like to see a real coming together and a sharing and a listening, and especially for us white people to shut up and listen to what they have to say and see if we can somehow learn how to deal with our little energy crisis without stepping all over them. Because again, this is akin to the story about the housing, the story about energy. What's the energy here? The story is we need more energy. That's the message. We, modern Americans, need more energy. We are not going to do with less. And the reality is the cheapest energy is the energy you don't use. Everything else costs. Everything else has negative impacts. The energy you don't use is clean and free. And so using less energy is I think, long-term path towards a sustainable culture. Not where else can we get it.
Do you think that's feasible, though? I don't even think that dynamic is at play. I don't know if we use less, especially less than we're using now. I don't see that as a realistic path we take at all.
It's realistic. It's just not what people want. We are a more culture. More, as Billy Idol once said, mo, 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 right? That's what we want. We want more. Got to stop thinking that way. Just an example. I'm building a light straw clay natural building structure in McKinleyville. And we'll get into this later. I'm not going to get into permaculture now, but one of the things we have to do to build this house is put on a solar system. So solar systems are now mandated on all new construction in California. Now, I don't have a problem with that. I think that's probably a good thing. But the way solar is evolving in California, it seems to me, is that the government and business want us to foot the bill for building the infrastructure that they will profit from. And that's the problem when you have utilities who operate on this we're selling power paradigm. And most American utility companies operate on the idea that they're selling a commodity. If you're selling energy, and that's basically what you do, then having people conserve makes absolutely no sense. You don't want people to use less energy if your business is selling it to them. If we change the paradigm so that utility companies were managing our energy resources and figuring out what the best way was for us to get efficient use of them, we would have a completely different landscape. But right now, they want to sell to us. And so PG&E is selling to us. And they talk about conservation, but do they really want us all to use half of what we're now using? What would that do to their business model? So there's no real incentive in some ways to do it. The only incentive, at least according to Jevon, would be that your utility bill goes up. Because when your utility bill goes up, you start using less. When gas goes up, you use less. When gas costs $7 a gallon, you're only using what you really need. And you're walking more and you're biking more and you're carpooling more. And when gas goes down to $2 a gallon, you're driving everywhere. You're driving down the end of your driveway. Get your mail and drive back. So energy conservation is hugely important if we want society to continue, instead of this endless quest for more. And that's what I think the offshore wind project represents, this desperation to make more money off of selling more energy when maybe the cheapest thing and the more efficient thing would be to figure out how we're going to use less. Yes, sir.
But hasn't the argument been made that societies have flourished and grown based off the back of cheap energy? That the idea that if we can make more energy and have it available to more people at a lower cost, we might actually be in a better space? I mean, if people aren't struggling just to keep the lights on, if energy is so cheap, then rather than paying 42 cents for a kilowatt, you're paying 5 cents. That people can do more. Their money's going to go farther. They're not going to have to worry about heating their house in the winter. Isn't there an argument to be made to, especially maybe only in energy terms, to make it more expansive, to make it cheaper for people? That's my fear with the wind farm. That's how I see this going down, is they're going to build this and energy prices are going to skyrocket. And people are going to be paying a lot more, maybe just for the branding of having a quote unquote clean energy.
Bills will go up to pay for that project.
And because of that project, because of how inefficient those wind farms actually are, that if we swap over to that, naturally prices are just going to increase.
Well, I think that everyone who benefits from cheap energy loves it. And it's great that we have all of these modern conveniences, but we don't need them. And part of the problem is there's a negative exhaust from the use of energy. Every energy source that we've got, with the exception of solar and wind, have a negative effect on the climate.
Why not solar and wind?
Because they don't emit anything.
Yeah, but the process of making those solar panels and the wind turbines.
So, obviously if you could make a wind turbine using wind power,
you'd be set.
That'd be nice. And maybe that's where they want to go. But everything else, the fossil fuels, and now they're talking nuclear again, which I think is crazy.
You don't like nuclear?
Absolutely not. It's the dirtiest energy there is.
In terms of?
The waste from nuclear power plants will kill you 10,000 years from now. We're sitting on, here's another story to watch, king salmon. We're sitting on a nuclear waste stockpile in a flood zone, in a sea level inundation zone. You familiar with that?
I didn't know that they had any nuclear waste down there.
You do, because they built a nuclear power plant in the 70s down at King Salmon.
They didn't move any of that waste out of there?
No, they didn't. It's still there. So what happened is they build this utilities plant, and we still have it there. It's down there. It's, I think they're burning natural gas in it now. But we got the power plant, and over on the north end of it is the remnants of a nuclear power plant that they built, and then California shut down nuclear energy. And in that nuclear complex is the waste from having used nuclear power sitting there, 44 feet above sea level.
Makes you wonder how good that containment is.
Yes, you would really want, and there's there are people that are really experts on this in Humboldt who are following this, and so that's one of the things that I'd like to see happens is how are they going to address the nuclear waste in a sea level rise inundation zone.
You don't buy into the idea that that's the cleanest energy that we have?
Or no, it's not clean.
But it's cleaner compared to anything technologically that we currently have access to.
No, it's not. It's not cleaner at all. So let's say that you light a fire in your fireplace. Your exhaust is going to be smoke, right? And smoke is air polluting and it's carbon emitting. So you say, well, I don't want the smoke, so I'm gonna heat with electricity instead. So you shutter your wood burning stove and you hook up your electric heater. Now, electricity is the worst thing to heat with in terms of the amount of electricity for the BTUs. Okay, it's like anything else. If you plug a hairdryer in or you plug in your phone charger, you can charge your phone from here to Kingdom Come for the same amount of electricity for 2 minutes on a hairdryer. I mean, heating elements just drink the juice. So you go in and you say, okay, I'm going to do electricity. It's clean. It's not going to have smoke. I'm going to use this. Now, you don't know where your electricity comes from. So you go and you find out that your electricity is caused from burning coal or burning natural gas. Now, natural gas has become the product of choice for though for coal burning plants that are trying to convert. So now we're burning natural gas. So there's a carbon emission at the site where you're burning the natural gas, and there's a whole carbon footprint of getting the natural gas to that power plant, because natural gas isn't coming out right there where the plant is. Natural gas is hundreds of miles away. Huge carbon footprint to have electricity so you can avoid the smoke. Well, I would say put in a stove to warm your place that doesn't emit any smoke. You can do that. It's called a rocket stove. And a rocket stove was developed by these guys in Oregon for this very purpose, because smoke is unburnt fuel. And so when you throw a log in a fireplace and smoke goes up the chimney, that's fuel that didn't burn, didn't combust. So in a rocket stove, you cycle that back through and you burn the smoke on the second try. It can be done in every household that has a wood-burning stove. You can have a wood-burning stove that doesn't pollute.
There's no byproduct? There's no waste?
It's all heat.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, and there's things like that all over the place. So I think that the more we can find small solutions that we can do to lower the pollution levels and the impact we're having, the better. And that large centralized systems are not designed to do that.
What about a bunch of decentralized nuclear power plants? Miniature nuclear power plants?
It sounds like a good thing, but what are you going to do with the waste?
I'm definitely pro-nuclear. I think nuclear is going to be the salvation of our society if we can actually get there. But crazy, this might be a crazy idea, and put it in the context of a 27-year-old podcaster saying this. Why don't we just shoot it into space? But really though,
well, why have we spent 50 years trying to find a place to bury it?
It seems better than burying it, for sure. It's just
why
take
hasn't
it
it
off
been
planet.
done? Why hasn't Elon Musk decided to use SpaceX?
I'll call him up.
Yeah.
I'll call him up. I got him on speed dial. Ask him a couple questions. But really, because it seems like in terms of footprint, that is the best option that we have, and especially considering it's contained, we have these spent fuel rods that we could get rid of, and then there would be no waste from that.
And I will join your camp when they figured out how to dispose of the waste safely. They haven't even tried.
Do you think some of that's just because, especially in the States here, we have been so anti-nuclear that we have stifled innovation in some degree on that front?
I don't know.
Just through the nature.
I don't know why. Why are problems that we had in the 70s still around now? Why haven't they been solved? Good question. Why do we still have homeless people? Why do we still have nuclear waste that's got a half-life of 40,000 years? Why aren't these problems being solved? And I don't know why they're not being solved, but I'd like them solved, and I'm going to be following these stories in 2025 to see if we're coming anywhere close to it. One of those other issues that we just talked about with king salmon was sea level rise. That's another story to watch in 2025. It's really ironic. You ever met Alderon Laird?
No.
Okay, so Alderon Laird is like the local guru on sea level rise. He's an engineer. And I've met him a couple times, and he regularly gives presentations on sea level.
What's his name? Alderon?
Alderon, like out of Star Wars. Alderon Laird. And Alderon has been watching sea level rise for decades, and it's really ironic how we are as humans when we don't really plan ahead. So we build power plant where right on the coast, so it's the most likely to flood.
Earthquake zone.
Then we run our infrastructure across from that power plant north through the slough. So all you can see it when you drive up to Arcata from Eureka or whatever. You can see the towers, the transmission towers, all across the field where it's a couple of days ago was all flooded. The fiber optic cable, all of our critical infrastructure, our water infrastructure, because we're getting water from the Mad River down to Eureka, down to Arcata. All of our infrastructure is in a sea level inundation zone. Now, maybe they did that because it was the easiest thing to do at the time. I don't know. But the end result is that a lot of the things that we rely upon for our daily, normal, middle-class American life are sitting in a flood zone. And I don't believe there's much planning being done to change that. I mean, a symbol of it is the little stretch of road that runs by the eucalyptus trees.
That trail that they're putting in?
Yeah. I mean, you look out and there's the wonderful Humboldt Bay right at eye level. We all know that if the sea level rises just a little bit, Humboldt Bay will cross 101 and reclaim all the swampland that we tried to take from it. And is Caltrans building a 101 stretch that's 5 feet higher for that? No. They're putting in some traffic lights. Or no, they're putting in an overpass. So Caltrans is not doing anything to mitigate for the idea that 101 could be flooded. And we're going to see. We're going to see how much this flooding is going to continue and how much the sea level rise is going to continue. One of the things I can tell you about sea level rise and climate change is that whatever models people had, it's all happening faster than they thought. That seems to be a universal. It's like, oops, that's happening fast. That was hotter than we thought it was going to be. So all of our projections for climate change, including sea level rise, I think are probably conservative. And so I, in particular, don't want to live in Jacoby Creek or Bayside or Arcata Bottoms. Those are the first areas that are going to go underwater. And yet there is a sea level rise plan. And Arcata kind of finalized it this year. What they think needs to happen, and they've tried to identify some critical areas of Arcata that are going to be easily flooded, and they're thinking about how do we mitigate that. And I don't know if I haven't read the plan thoroughly. I don't know if they're planning a series of dikes. Maybe we're going to become like the Netherlands, just have a bunch of dikes everywhere. But the problem they've had with dikes and, seawalls and stuff is that all the property between Eureka and Arcata, all along that stretch, are owned by 500,000 different people. I mean, it's all a bunch of different people. There isn't any coordinated effort. Some guy says, I don't want to have any dike on my property. I got a lot of cows I got to feed or whatever. And so they don't have to put one up.
Well, I think then the Fed would step in and use eminent domain and just kind of ramrod it.
I wonder if that'll happen. Or the state. Can Caltrans come in and say, well, it's 101. We're going to need a sea level rise easement 100 feet on either side of 101, and we're going to have to do something here. I don't know.
That's why I laugh when I see that trail, because everyone that is a proponent for that trail is also a firm believer that, 101's going to be underwater here in the next decade or two. And so I always question, well, why are we building a trail right there?
Yeah.
How much money went towards that trail?
I don't know.
And that's a good way to spend our money. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And
I'll have to reach out to that Alderon guy and see if I can get him on.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting to talk about.
And then one last story I'm going to be watching in 2025. Maybe the biggest story is Leo. Leo's movie. Leo DiCaprio.
Oh.
Leo DiCaprio's movie's coming out in August of 2025.
Do we know what this movie's about? Has there been anything?
We have a basic idea. It's based upon a book called Vineland by Thomas Pynchon. And its working title is The Battle of Bactan Cross. And apparently Leo made like $20 million making this movie. Did you get a chance to go?
No, I didn't.
See him out at Murphy's or on the bridge over yeah. So, I mean, it was quite a local deal, right? That, Hollywood's in town. I remember seeing the catering trucks coming into McKinleyville even to load up. And yet I didn't have a Leo sighting other than the fact he kept calling me on my cell. I'm like, Leo, I can't talk.
I'm too busy right now.
I can't talk right now. I'm in a podcast. But anyway, I think it'll be fun. On a happy note, it'll be fun to see whatever they call it, Vineland or the Battle of Bactan Cross or whatever they end up calling the movie. They call it the BC Project at the time, which is for Bactan Cross. So,
just a little uplifting story there to follow.
We'll see, like, well, that isn't Humboldt, or yeah, that's my brother right there, in the laying down in the gutter by Murphy's or whatever it is, So anyway, I'll be really watching for that one. Hopefully it'll be a
good movie.
A theater near you, yeah.
Because if it sucks, then it's like, oh, we're in a movie that flopped. 2025 is going to be an interesting year. I'm excited.
Well, good.
I'm excited. I mean, I'm definitely nihilistic in the sense that I do think there's a strong possibility the world ends. But barring that, I think it'll be a good year.
So we should meet again in 2025.
And we'll do it in January.
We'll talk about how to build the perfect world.
And we'll have to get an update on your build to see where you're at and how it's going. I'd be interested to hear that.
All right.
Okay.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thanks, Dave.